The rain hit the glass storefront like 1,000 tapping fingers, each strike sharp enough to slice through the silence of the nearly empty bakery. The evening rush had long faded, the warm lights reflected in ripples across the soaked pavement. And inside, the air still carried the sweet scent of vanilla and old memories. At the far corner of the shop, near a shelf of discounted pastries no one wanted, stood a man whose presence did not belong in a place of scarcity. His coat was expensive, his shoes polished, his watch unmistakably luxurious. But none of that mattered in the moment he heard the faint, trembling voice of a father standing a few feet away, clutching an empty wallet. In hands that had known too much work and too little rest, the words that spilled from the man's cracked lips were the kind that freeze time itself. He asked the cashier if they had an expired cake, not a fresh one but an old unsellable, thrown-away cake because it was his daughter's birthday, and he didn't have enough money for anything else. And the millionaire, who had come only to escape the noise of his own hollow success, felt something inside him break for the first time in years. If you believe every human deserves kindness, second chances, and a bit of light in dark times, then take a moment now to comment, share, and subscribe to Gentle Hearts. Your support helps these emotional stories reach more people who need hope. The father standing before the cashier looked like he had run through storms, far fiercer than the one outside. His clothes were damp. His shoulders slumped from a weight that wasn't just from the rain, and his eyes carried the heavy glaze of a man who had fought too many battles alone. He said he didn't need anything fancy, didn't need candles or decorations, didn't need frosting or words written in cream. His voice shook as he explained that his only wish was that his little girl could blow out a candle on something, anything, so she wouldn't think her father had forgotten her special day. He lowered his head as if ashamed of even asking, as if guilt were stitched into his skin. The millionaire watched him with unsettling stillness, as though he were staring at a ghost of the life he once lived, but refused to acknowledge. The wealthy man had spent years believing money could erase the past, bury the memories, and drown the voices that once reminded him of who he used to be. But at that moment, the sight of the struggling father tore open an old wound he had never dared to look at directly. The millionaire's name was Adele. To the world, he was a symbol of triumph, the owner of a growing chain of tech companies, a man whose success was discussed in boardrooms, magazines, and business schools, yet beneath the surface was a childhood he never spoke about, one filled with empty fridges, shut-off notices tucked under the door, and a mother who cried quietly while pretending everything was fine. He had once been the child who wished for a birthday cake, but got a candle stuck into a piece of dry bread instead. He had once stood behind his mother in grocery stores, as she counted coins with trembling hands, whispering apologies to cashiers she couldn't meet in the eye. So when he heard the father ask for an expired cake, every buried memory came roaring back with the force of a tidal wave. The cashier, a young woman with gentle eyes, stuttered in discomfort, clearly moved but unsure how to respond. Store policy did not allow giving away expired goods. They had to be thrown out, even if they were still edible. The father nodded weakly as though he had expected nothing more, and turned away without arguing. It was the way he turned slow defeated, carrying invisible sorrows that made Adele walk toward him, with a heaviness he hadn't felt in years. He didn't speak immediately, didn't offer money right away, and didn't ask questions. Instead, he watched the father pause near the door, steadying himself before stepping back into the storm. There was something profoundly heartbreaking about a man preparing to return to his child. Empty-handed as the father finally pushed the door open, the wind slapped his face with cold rain, but he didn't flinch. He was used to. This life had rained on him far harder than the sky ever could. His name was Sammy, and life had not treated him kindly. Once a mechanic known for his skill, he lost his workshop after a fire destroyed everything. Insurance refused to pay out due to paperwork he never understood. His wife fell sick soon after, and in an attempt to save her, he sold the little he had left. She passed away anyway now, with debts piled high, odd jobs scarce, and a young daughter who deserved more than life was giving her. Sammy fought every day just to keep food on the table. He wasn't greedy, wasn't proud, wasn't angry, he was just tired. So very, very tired, Adele followed him outside, calling out softly through the rain. At first, Sammy stiffened, thinking someone was going to reprimand him for asking such an embarrassing question. People had judged him before for being poor, for being a single father, for not keeping up with life's demands. But instead he turned to meet a gaze filled not with pity, but with a kind of deep, trembling recognition. The millionaire told him to wait under the awning, then walked back inside the bakery. The cashier watched curiously as he approached her, with a calm confidence, but there was a tremble in his breath that betrayed something emotional. Adele did not just buy a cake. He bought the biggest one in the store, the kind covered in delicate swirls of cream and sugar roses. He bought candles, balloons, and even a box of colorful sprinkles he didn't know the first thing about. But more than that, he asked the cashier if she could prepare the cake with extra care, explaining in a quiet voice that this cake was not about luxury, it was about dignity. The rain softened as Adele walked back outside, carrying the cake in both hands, the warm glow of light behind him, making the scene feel almost cinematic. Sammy stared at the cake not with greed, but with disbelief, as though unable to accept something so beautiful was meant for him. His hands refused to reach forward, trembling as though afraid the cake might vanish if he touched it. Adele placed it gently into his arms and told him that every father doing his best deserved moments of grace. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of years of silence, healing something in both men simultaneously. Sammy tried to refuse, saying he could never repay this kindness. But Adele shook his head. He said, there were debts that could only be repaid by passing kindness forward, not by giving money for a moment. The two men simply stood under the awning, the rain falling softly around them like a blessing. Then Sammy whispered that his daughter's name was Mira, and that she would never forget this act of compassion. He said she always told him that good people existed, even when life felt cruel. And now he believed her. Adele insisted on walking Sammy home, despite the rain beginning to pick up again. As they made their way through narrow, dimly lit streets, Adele glimpsed a part of the city he had forgotten. He saw families gathered under small porches, heard laughter echoing from homes with broken windows, yet warm hearts, and felt something missing from his own lavish but empty life. They reached a small, worn-down apartment building, its paint peeling and its lights faint. Inside, Mira sat on a thin mattress, her eyes shining with innocence and hope. Even though the room around her spoke of hardship, when she saw her father carrying the cake, her entire face lit up with a joy that could melt stone. She ran forward, barefoot, arms open, her little voice cracking with excitement. There was no luxury in her world, but her heart held more purity than any mansion could contain. Adele watched softly as Mira hugged her father, thanking him again and again, unaware of the stranger who had made this moment possible. When Sammy finally introduced him, Mira smiled shyly and said that if he was a friend of her father, then he must be a good person. It was a simple sentence, but it struck Adele like lightning. He had spent years surrounded by people who valued him for his wealth, ambition, and influence, not for his heart. Hearing a child say he was a good person made him feel something he hadn't felt in decades seen. The three of them lit the candles, and Mira closed her eyes tightly, making a wish before blowing them out. She wished that her father would no longer be sad. She wished that he would smile more. She wished he would be healthy, strong and safe. The candlelight flickered in her wide, hopeful eyes, painting the kind of picture the millionaire knew he would never forget. After spending time with the two, Adele walked home that night, with thoughts heavier than the storm clouds above him. He had built empires but lost touch with humanity. He had bought everything he wanted, yet lacked the warmth he once had when he was poor. That night, instead of returning to his penthouse, he drove to his office and stayed up with a notebook, writing ideas for a foundation that would provide assistance to low-income families. Without drowning them in paperwork or humiliation, he named the foundation after his mother, the woman who raised him to be kind even when life was cruel. And he put Sammy's story at the center of his purpose. Weeks later, Sammy received a visit from Adele, who handed him an offer letter, not as charity but as a job. The foundation needed people who understood struggle, who had lived through it and survived. Sammy's knowledge as a former mechanic and handyman would help with the foundation's community projects. With trembling hands and teary eyes, he accepted, and for the first time in years, he felt hope take root in his chest. Over time, Adele became a family friend. He celebrated Myra's birthdays, helped her with school supplies, and made sure Sammy always had support. The bond between them was not built on wealth, but on the shared understanding that life was hardest on those who least deserved suffering. And that kindness had the power to rewrite destinies. Months passed, and the foundation grew into something larger than either man could have imagined. It became a sanctuary for single parents, struggling families, widows, and abandoned elders. People began sharing their stories online, inspiring thousands across the country. And at the heart of it all was one moment.